Marcus Williams was dreaming of his daughter's 6th birthday party when the Boeing 737 started falling out of the sky. He jerked awake to the sound of screaming, not the controlled movie scream kind, but raw animal terror from 200 throats at once, and the sick, weightless lurch of an aircraft in freefall. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like yellow tentacles, swinging wildly as the plane pitched and rolled. The overhead bins burst open, raining luggage and duty-free bags onto passengers who were already clutching their armrests hard enough to leave bruises. Marcus's combat instincts kicked in before his conscious mind caught up. Check your six. Assess the threat. Control what you can control. He grabbed his oxygen mask with hands that didn't shake, hands that had flown F-16s through enemy fire over Baghdad, hands that had landed a crippled fighter on a damaged carrier deck in the Persian Gulf, hands that now spent their days changing diapers and making peanut butter sandwiches because the Air Force didn't want pilots with PTSD, even decorated ones. The plane leveled out for a moment, just long enough for people to start breathing again, and then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Except it wasn't the smooth, confident captain's voice that had welcomed them aboard 3 hours ago. This voice was tight, desperate, afraid. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hendricks. We have experienced a catastrophic systems failure. I need static. A crash. Muffled shouting. Then a different voice, younger, shakier. This is First Officer Chen. Captain Hendricks is incapacitated. I've got the controls, but I've lost hydraulics, I've lost flight management, I've lost. His voice cracked. If there are any pilots on this aircraft, I need you in the cockpit right now. Please. We're carrying 237 souls, and I don't know if I can bring them home. The plane dropped again, sickeningly, and somewhere in the back a woman started praying in Spanish, her voice rising over the chaos. Marcus looked out the window at the wing, or what was left of it. The right engine was on fire, trailing black smoke, and he could see hydraulic fluid streaming from the wing root like arterial blood. Metal fragments that used to be part of the engine housing were embedded in the fuselage. This wasn't a systems failure. This was a catastrophic explosion, the kind that turned planes into tombstones. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Immediately, the flight attendant nearest to him, a middle-aged white woman with Sarah on her name tag and panic in her eyes, grabbed his arm. Sir, you need to sit down and buckle your seatbelt right now. I'm a pilot, Marcus said quietly. I need to get to the cockpit. Sarah looked him up and down, taking in his faded jeans, his worn Howard University sweatshirt, his day-old stubble, and her grip tightened. Sir, this is not the time for jokes. Sit down. I'm not joking. I'm a former Air Force pilot. 14 years, multiple combat tours. That man up front needs help. I said sit down. Sarah's voice went shrill. We don't need some random passenger making things worse. The first officer knows what he's doing. The first officer sounds like he's about 25 years old and flying the biggest emergency of his life, Marcus said, keeping his voice level even though adrenaline was starting to sing in his veins. How many hours do you think he has? 1,500? 2,000? I've got 4,000 hours in fighters and another 2,000 in commercial aircraft before, he stopped himself. Before they grounded me. Before the nightmares got so bad I couldn't pass the psychological evaluation. Before I became just another black man trying to explain to white people that I'm qualified to do the job I was literally trained for. The plane shuddered violently and several passengers screamed. Marcus pulled free of Sarah's grasp and started moving forward. Behind him, he heard her shouting into her handset, "We've got a situation in coach, passenger refusing to comply, black male, 6'2", approaching the cockpit." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept walking. Because here was the thing about being a black man in America. You learned early that every space you entered as a potential threat first and a human being second. You learned that your credentials didn't matter as much as your skin color. You learned that you could have a chest full of medals and a distinguished flying cross and people would still see you as suspicious before they saw you as a savior. But right now, 237 people were about to die if somebody didn't help Chen fly this broken bird, and Marcus had spent too many years in the cockpit to let his ego keep him in his seat. He reached the cockpit door just as another flight attendant, This one a young black woman whose name tag read Keisha, stepped in front of him. But instead of blocking him, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "Are you really a pilot?" "Yes." "Can you help?" "I can try." Keisha grabbed the cockpit phone and spoke rapidly into it. 5 seconds later, the reinforced door cracked open and Marcus pushed through into chaos. The cockpit looked like the aftermath of a bomb, and maybe it was. Sparks shot from the overhead panel. Alarms shrieked from every direction. The windscreen was spiderwebbed with cracks. And in the left seat, Captain Hendricks slumped unconscious with blood running down the side of his face from a gash in his scalp. First Officer Chen sat in the right seat, both hands death-gripping the yoke, his face the color of old paper. "Who are you?" Chen gasped. "Captain Marcus Williams, United States Air Force, retired." "What V you got?" "I don't even know where to start," Chen said, his voice ragged. "The right engine exploded about 10 minutes ago. Took out the hydraulic lines. Flight controls are barely responding. I've got partial aileron authority and maybe 30% elevator control. Rudders completely gone. The autopilot's dead. Flight management system's dead. We're on manual reversion and I can't. I've never flown manual reversion except in the simulator. I don't know if I can hold her steady long enough to," he broke off, fighting the controls as the plane tried to roll right. "We're 20 minutes from Los Angeles International, but I don't think we're going to make it." Marcus dropped into the jump seat behind them and rapidly scanned the instruments, his mind automatically processing data the way it had for 14 years of flying. Airspeed decreasing. Altitude 22,000 feet and dropping at 700 feet per minute. Heading erratic. Engine number 2. Fire warning light blazing red. Engine number 1. Running hot but still producing thrust. Hydraulic pressure. Systems A and B completely depleted. System C at 15% and falling. This plane was dying in midair, and in maybe 15 minutes it was going to stop being an aircraft and start being a 200,000-pound brick. "Okay," Marcus said, forcing his voice into the calm, clipped tone he'd used on bombing runs over Baghdad. "First thing, forget about LAX. We're not making it there." "What's closer?" Chen blinked. "There's March Air Reserve Base is about 40 miles south. But that's a military installation, we can't just." "We can and we will. I know March. I trained there. Call it in, declare an emergency, tell them we're coming in hot." Marcus leaned forward. "Chen, I need you to let me take the controls." Chen's head snapped around. "What? No. I'm the first officer. I'm rated for this aircraft. You're—" "I'm the guy who's landed jets with worse damage than this," Marcus said. "I'm the guy who's flown combat missions where one wrong move meant death for everyone in the air and on the ground. I'm the guy who can bring this plane down without killing anyone, but I need you to trust me right now." For 3 long seconds, Chen stared at him. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind those terrified eyes. Trust the stranger who just walked in, or try to save 200 people by himself and probably fail. "Okay," Chen whispered. "Okay. Your aircraft." "My aircraft," Marcus confirmed, and everything else fell away. The fear. The exhaustion. The PTSD. The discrimination. The 1,000 daily humiliations of being a black father trying to raise a daughter alone on disability pay while the country he'd served forgot he existed. None of that mattered now. Right now, he was back in the cockpit where he belonged, and he had a job to do. Marcus gripped the yoke and immediately felt what Chen had been fighting. The plane was sluggish, unresponsive, fighting him like a wounded animal. With no hydraulics, every input took immense physical strength. His shoulders burned as he muscled the yoke left, trying to level the wings. The aircraft responded reluctantly, groaning with metal fatigue. "Chen, get on the radio. Tell March we're declaring an emergency. Tell them we need the longest runway they've got and every emergency vehicle they can muster. Tell them we're coming in with no hydraulics, 1 engine, and limited flight control. Tell them we'll need crash trucks, foam, the works." Chen grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "March Tower, this is United Flight 2847. we are declaring an emergency, requesting immediate clearance for landing, we have. United 2847, March Tower reads you loud and clear. Runway 21 is clear and ready. Winds are 230 at 15 knots. Emergency equipment is rolling. What's your position and altitude? Marcus checked the instruments. Tell them we're 43 miles north-northwest, Angels 20 and descending. Chen relayed the information while Marcus fought to keep the plane in something resembling controlled flight. Every second the right wing wanted to drop. Every second the nose wanted to pitch up or down. It was like flying a shopping cart with 3 broken wheels, except the shopping cart was filled with 200 human beings who were praying and crying and clutching each other in the cabin behind him. Marcus, Chen said quietly, I've never done a dead stick landing. That's okay. I have. Marcus allowed himself one grim smile. Granted, it was in an F-16, not a 737, but the physics are the same. We're basically a glider now. One engine gives us some thrust for control, but we can't maintain altitude. We're going to descend steadily until we're on the ground or in the ground, and I'd prefer the former. The altimeter spun downward. 18,000 feet. 15,000. The San Bernardino Mountains rose up through the haze below them, brown and sharp and deadly. Marcus adjusted course slightly south, threading between peaks, using what little control authority he had to keep them on a rough glide path toward March. Behind them, the cockpit door opened and Sarah pushed in, her face red and furious. What is going on here? Who authorized this man to get out? Chen said, not taking his eyes off the instruments. Excuse me? I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft and I said get out. Chen's voice cracked like a whip. This man is trying to save all of our lives including yours, so either help or get the hell out of this cockpit. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then she retreated, slamming the door behind her. Thanks, Marcus said. I should have listened to you the first time, Chen replied. I'm sorry. I just... Don't apologize. You're doing fine. Marcus glanced at him. When we get on the ground, you and I are going to have a beer and you're going to tell me how a kid young enough to be my son has the balls to fly a dying plane through the sky. But right now I need you to focus. We're about to do something very dangerous. More dangerous than what we're already doing? Way more dangerous. We're going to deliberately spin out the dead engine to kill the fire, then restart engine 1 at minimal power to give us just enough control to make the runway. If I mess it up, we lose all thrust and we become a paperweight. If I do it right, we might actually walk away from this. Chen's face went gray. That's not in any manual I've ever read. That's because manuals are written by people who assume everything works. I learned this from a guy who survived 2 engine flameouts over the Indian Ocean. Marcus's hands moved across the controls. Shutting down engine 2 fuel supply now. Cutting ignition. Deploying emergency fuel dump. The damaged engine coughed, sputtered, and went silent. The fire warning light flickered and died. For 10 seconds they flew in relative quiet, just the whistle of wind over the damaged wing and the labored breathing of 3 people who knew they were probably about to die. Then Marcus restarted engine 1 on minimum thrust, and the plane shuddered back to life like a car running on fumes. Okay, Marcus breathed. Okay. We've got maybe 5 minutes of flying time left. Chen, call the cabin. Tell Keisha to prepare for emergency landing. Brace position, all loose items secured. Life vests on. Move. Chen grabbed the cabin phone and started barking orders. Marcus focused on the windscreen where March Air Reserve Base was appearing through the haze. Blessed, beautiful, with its long concrete runways designed to handle heavy military transports. The tower was calling them with vectors and wind updates, but Marcus barely heard it. All of his attention had narrowed to a single point, that strip of gray concrete 3 miles ahead and 2,000 feet below. The plane was bucking and shuddering now, the airframe protesting every second it stayed in the air. Marcus eased back on the throttle, lowered the nose, aimed for the numbers painted at the threshold of runway 21. No flaps because the hydraulics were gone. No speed brakes for the same reason. No thrust reversers to slow them down once they touched. They were going to land fast and hot and hope the runway was long enough. "Gear down," Marcus said. Chen hit the switch. Nothing happened. "Gear's not responding," Chen said, his voice climbing. "We've got no hydraulics for the gear. Emergency extension. There's a manual release. It's not working. The system's totally dead. We're going to have to land gear up." Chen looked at Marcus with naked fear. "We're going to land gear up on a concrete runway at 180 knots. "Yes, we are," Marcus said calmly. "Tell the tower. Tell them we need maximum foam coverage on the runway. And tell Keisha to make sure everyone's in full brace position because this is going to be rough." The runway rushed up to meet them. 1,000 feet. 500. Marcus pulled back on the yoke, flaring the nose, bleeding off speed, trying to make the belly landing as gentle as 200,000 pounds of metal hitting concrete could ever be. He thought of his daughter Zoe, her gap-toothed smile, the way she called him Daddy, like it was the most important word in the world. He thought of Sarah, his dead wife, who'd made him promise to take care of their girl no matter what. He thought of every pilot who'd ever told him he didn't belong in a cockpit because of the color of his skin, and he thought, "Watch this." The plane hit the runway belly first with a scream of tortured metal that sounded like the earth breaking open. Sparks exploded in every direction as the fuselage scraped concrete, the friction generating enough heat to melt steel. The plane skidded sideways, then forward, then sideways again, shedding pieces of itself as it went, the auxiliary power unit, part of the tail section, an entire cargo door. Inside, the cabin passengers screamed and prayed and held each other tight. The emergency slides deployed automatically and instantly shredded themselves against the runway. Fire erupted along the left side where fuel lines ruptured. And Marcus held on. He held the yoke steady even when his shoulders felt like they were tearing out of their sockets. He used every ounce of remaining control authority to keep the nose up, keep the fuselage level, keep them sliding straight down the centerline instead of spinning out into the grass where they'd cartwheel and break apart and burn. He flew the wreckage like it was still an aircraft, all the way down, until the plane finally groaned to a stop 3/4 of the way down the runway, nose pointed skyward at a crazy angle, both wings crumpled, the entire underbelly scraped down to bare metal. 4-5 seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the emergency evacuation alarm started blaring and Marcus yelled, "Get them out! Chen, get them out now!" The next 10 minutes were a blur of smoke and fire and organized chaos. The emergency slides that hadn't been destroyed deployed properly. Passengers poured out of the plane and ran across the tarmac while crash trucks sprayed foam over the burning wreckage. Marcus and Chen dragged Captain Hendricks out of his seat and down the slide, the older pilot semi-conscious and groaning. Keisha appeared like an angel through the smoke, helping elderly passengers, carrying a screaming toddler, counting heads as people ran toward the waiting ambulances. Marcus was the last one out. He stood at the exit door, scanning the cabin one final time to make sure no one was left behind, and then he jumped. He hit the concrete hard, rolled, came up running. He ran until his legs gave out and he collapsed on the grass at the edge of the runway, coughing smoke out of his lungs, watching the plane that had been Flight 2847 burn against the California sky. Someone dropped down beside him. Chen, soot-covered and trembling, with tears streaming down his face. "We did it," he gasped. "Holy God, we did it. Everyone's out. Everyone's alive." Marcus couldn't speak. He just nodded and watched the emergency crews swarm over the wreckage and felt 14 years of grief and anger and shame finally crack open inside his chest. He'd saved them. All of them. He'd done what he was trained to do, what he was born to do, and for the first time since the Air Force had grounded him, he felt like himself again. The news crews arrived within an hour. By hour 2, the story had gone viral. Hero pilot saves 237 lives in miracle crash landing. By hour 4, Marcus was sitting in a hangar surrounded by reporters shouting questions while the base commander and the head of the NTSB tried to restore order. And Sarah, the flight attendant who tried to stop him, stood in the back of the crowd with her arms crossed and her face carefully blank. A reporter from CNN pushed forward. "Captain Williams, can you walk us through what happened up there?" Marcus cleared his throat. First Officer Chen did the hard part. He kept the plane in the air long enough for help to arrive. I just brought us home. But you're the one who landed the aircraft. Yes, ma'am. And we understand you're a decorated combat pilot who's been medically retired from service. Is that correct? Marcus hesitated. This was where it got complicated. This was where he had to explain that the Air Force had decided a pilot with PTSD was too unstable to fly, even though his hands had been steady enough to land a broken plane. This was where he had to talk about the nightmares, the flashbacks, the therapist who tried to help him process watching his wingman die over Fallujah. This was where the story stopped being heroic and started being messy and human and real. But before he could answer, another voice cut through the noise. He saved my life. Everyone turned. An elderly woman in a wheelchair rolled forward, her arm in a sling, her white hair standing up in wild tufts. She looked at Marcus with fierce eyes. I'm Evelyn Thornton. I was in seat 12B. And when this man stood up to help, one of your flight attendants tried to stop him. Tried to keep him in his seat because she saw a black man moving toward the cockpit and assumed he was a threat instead of a hero. I heard her on the phone calling security on him. While he was trying to save all of us. The hangar went dead silent. Is this true? The CNN reporter asked, whipping toward Sarah. Sarah's face went scarlet. I was following protocol. We're trained to be cautious about passengers approaching the cockpit, especially after September 11th, especially when they're black? Evelyn's voice could have cut glass. Say it. That's what you meant. This man told you he was a pilot. He told you he could help. And you saw his skin color first and his qualifications never. Another passenger stepped forward, a young Latino man with a baby in his arms. She's right. I heard the whole thing. Captain Williams was trying to identify himself and that flight attendant treated him like a criminal. Then another voice, and another, passengers crowding forward with cell phone video, with testimonies, with righteous anger on behalf of the man who'd saved them while being suspected of terrorism for having the audacity to be competent and black at the same time. The base commander cleared his throat. I think that's enough questions for now. Captain Williams has been through a traumatic event and needs rest. We can schedule a formal press conference for tomorrow. But Marcus stood up. No. I want to say something. The hangar quieted again. I love flying, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the space. I've loved it since I was 8 years old and my grandfather took me to an air show and I saw the Blue Angels and knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. I worked twice as hard as everyone around me because I knew I had to. I graduated top of my class at the Air Force Academy. I flew combat missions in 2 wars. I earned a Distinguished Flying Cross and a Purple Heart and the respect of every pilot I ever served with. And then I came home broken, and the Air Force said I couldn't fly anymore, and I thought that part of my life was over. He looked at Chen, who was watching him with something like awe. Today proved I was wrong. I can still fly. I can still save lives. And no amount of discrimination or disbelief or people seeing my skin before they see my skill can change that. He turned to Sarah, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her. You almost kept me from helping today because you made an assumption. I hope you learn from that. I hope everyone learns from that. Because the next time you see someone who doesn't look like what you expect a hero to look like, maybe you'll remember this day and think twice. The cameras went crazy. The reporters mobbed him. The base commander pulled Marcus aside and told him the Air Force Chief of Staff wanted to speak with him personally. Chen grabbed Marcus in a bone-crushing hug and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for my life." But the moment Marcus would remember forever came 3 hours later, after the interviews and the medical checks and the endless debriefings, when he was finally allowed to use a phone to call his daughter. He sat alone in a borrowed office and dialed with shaking hands, and when Zoe's sleepy voice answered, she'd been staying with his mother while he was away, Marcus started crying. "Daddy? Why are you crying? Did something happen?" "Yeah, baby," Marcus managed. "Something happened. But we're all okay. Everyone's okay. Are you coming home soon?" "Soon as I can. I promise." "Okay. Daddy." I love you. I love you too, Zoe. So much. More than anything. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a conference room at the FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. and accepted his reinstatement as a commercial airline pilot, along with a formal apology from the Air Force and an offer to return to active duty as a flight instructor if he wanted it. He declined the military position but accepted work as a check airman for United, training other pilots to handle emergencies. Chen became his first student. They flew together every month, and Chen never let Marcus pay for the beer afterward. Sarah resigned from United 3 weeks after the crash. Marcus heard she moved to Florida and got a job that didn't involve making life-or-death assumptions about people. And on Zoe's 7th birthday, Marcus took her to the March Air Reserve Base for a special tour. The base commander himself showed them around, and at the end of the day, they stood on the very runway where Flight 2847 had made its emergency landing. The scorch marks were still visible, long black streaks where metal had screamed across concrete. "That's where you landed the plane?" Zoe asked, her small hand in his. "That's where we landed the plane," Marcus corrected. "Me and First Officer Chen and a whole lot of luck and physics." "Were you scared?" Marcus thought about that. About the moment when he'd stood up in the cabin and known every eye was on him, judging him, doubting him. About the weight of 237 lives resting on his shoulders. About the fire and the smoke and the endless seconds of bringing a broken bird home. "Yeah," he said. "I was terrified. But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." Because being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do what needs to be done regardless. Zoe looked up at him with his own eyes, her mother's stubborn chin, and said, "I'm going to be a pilot when I grow up. Just like you." Marcus knelt down so they were eye to eye. "If that's what you want, baby girl, then that's what you'll be. And I'm going to teach you everything I know. Starting with the most important lesson I ever learned." "What's that?" "That no matter what anyone tells you, no matter how many people doubt you or try to keep you in your seat, if you know you can help, if you know you can make a difference, you stand up. You walk forward. You trust your training and your skill and your heart. And you fly." He picked her up and spun her around while she shrieked with laughter, there on the runway where he'd proven to himself and the world that heroes don't always look like what you expect, that courage comes in every color, and that sometimes the person everyone wants to keep in their seat is exactly the person who needs to be at the controls. Marcus Williams had been a lot of things in his life. A son, a husband, a father, a soldier, a pilot, a man dismissed and doubted and diminished by people who should have known better. But on the day Flight 2847 fell out of the sky, he became the only thing that really mattered. Someone who saw people who needed saving and saved them, no matter the cost, no matter the doubt, no matter what anyone else believed about who had the right to be a hero. And that, in the end, was enough.